Recently I reviewed the Xtool D1 Pro. If you're a YouTuber and you even mentioned the word laser, I'm pretty sure that summons hordes of companies trying to get you to review their laser. A friend of mine happened to see my review, wanted a laser, and coincidentally Sculpfun reached out and here we are. This also gives me the opportunity to compare a less expensive laser than the D1 in Sculpfun's latest offering, the S30. It's taken me a little while to get to this review because it was sent without any sort of tracking information or warning, and it arrived halfway through moving day. I had no idea what it was, an unlabeled package, and I didn't have time to stop and check while we were loading up trucks. The 30 in S30 stands for how many minutes it'll take you to figure out what the 30 stands for. It's not the size of the machine, it's not 30 centimeters or 30 inches square. It's not the power output. This particular unit is a 5-watt optical output, but in the S30 line, the highest it goes to is 20 watts. It's not the 30th product in their lineup, as the previous model to this was the S10. Honestly, I think it's because 30's a bigger number, and that's about it. They've started strong in the annoying name department, so why stop there? This is the 5-watt model, but if you want the 10-watt model, that's the S30 Pro, and the 20-watt model is the S30 Pro Max. Thank you, Apple, for the dumbest naming convention. Do I recommend this? Well, I'm not going to bury the lead any further here. I don't recommend this machine. That's my opinion, and the rest of the review will be spent breaking that down into the good, the bad, and the ugly of this machine. First, let's start with the good. The S30 uses a familiar design from the S10 and S9, a little bit more on that later, which is a reasonably solid mechanical design. There's not really any flex to it, and this won't take the weight or forces of a router in a CNC setup, but for a laser and the lack of force that the laser beam actually exerts, it's more than rigid enough. The design also makes it quick to be put together and for it to be put together square, which is an important thing. In terms of assembly, it was perhaps a little bit slower than the D1 Pro, but we're in the same sort of ballpark of maybe one album of music instead of 3/4 of an album of music. If you can assemble Lego, you can pretty much assemble this without having any real trouble. I'm not sure if my unit was incorrectly packed, but it did have one size of hex key that wasn't included, so I had to supply my own tools. It's not really a big issue, but it was a bit of an odd choice for just one of the screws to be a different size. Perhaps the D1 Pro is overpriced, but the S30 is pretty aggressively priced. Comparing the two 10-watt models, the S30 is 10 to 20% cheaper. It can be a little bit hard to compare directly because of what is or isn't on sale. This is a newer model, so it's not on sale yet. And it does include an air assist, which the D1 doesn't, but it does come in consistently cheaper. The same goes for the 20-watt models. Speaking of the air assist pump, this is more or less the same base unit that I praised in the Xtool D1 Pro. It really doesn't wiggle around in use. One difference, however, is this is plugged into the controller boards rather than a PowerPoint, so it can be controlled in software. It's a really nice feature to have, and it's really nice that it's included standard. On all lasers, the lens is a consumable part, though many companies don't actually make this user serviceable, so you end up having to replace the whole diode unit. To Sculpfun's credit, not only have they made this lens replaceable, but they include a replacement lens and toolkit to do the actual replacement, which is, it's nice. No software is included, which is actually a good thing. It works just fine with free options like Laser Gerbil, as well as my preferred software, Lightburn. While Xtool's Creative Space software is fine, it doesn't really need to exist. Spend the R&D on hardware, not on software, which is a solved problem. Now onto the bad. First, what's new? The previous model was the S10 and this is the S30. So what's changed and what's new to justify such a big jump in product numbers? Nothing. At least best I can tell, they've added the replaceable lens and the air assist as standard, but that's it. If you have an S10, there's nothing new, and even the S9 wasn't that hugely different from the S10. The marketing material makes mention of Bluetooth and SD card control for fully offline function, whatever that means, but that's sold as an upgrade kit that you can't currently buy. It took me a little while to realize that the S30 had no crosshair laser. While this might not be a deal breaker for some, it's unfortunate to say the least. A second non-burning laser to help position where you're going to cut is a very nice feature to have. The limit switches are more homing switches. They help you set the 0 coordinates, but they feel like an afterthought. I'm not sure they'll be particularly durable. If the machine crashes into them, it's not going to stop the machine, and the switch will be crushed, and it's not super replaceable, just the switch itself. They stick out, and the cable management it's not good. On that, while the mechanical design is fairly solid, the particular design and the extrusion choice means that there's really nowhere to attach the cables to keep them tidy and out of the way. Attaching it to the rails then limits the motion of the gantry. You also can't cinch down on the air hose at all because it's very soft. You can see it has a kink in it already, and I'd be worried if you cinch down on it that it would block airflow. You set the height using the 50mm provided spacer. The knobs are pretty annoying for my size fingers, so you've got bigger hand sausages than I do. Skip the machine entirely. The focusing mechanism works, it's just fiddly, and you have to make sure you're placing the spacer correctly. And you could also lose the spacer compared to the flip down spacer on the X tool, which is impossible to lose. If that's the list of bad things, how much worse is the ugly? All lasers come with a degree of danger, and open frame diode lasers especially. They really should be in enclosures. This machine, or the X tool that I reviewed before it, aren't exceptions. However, more and more diode lasers are coming with other safety features which, while they don't negate the need for air filtration and enclosure, they go a long way to making things a little bit safer. And this is what really hurts the S30. Its list of safety features can be best described as absent. There's no e-stop, there's no flame sensor, there's no tilt sensor, the limit switches won't stop the machine from damaging itself. Worst of all, the protective shroud doesn't cover the backside of the laser. By not wrapping all the way around, any beams that happen to reflect will shoot out the back and potentially cause issues from eye damage to burning a dangling wire to whatever else. This is a deal breaker to me. The laser gets a fail grade because they've really half-assed the most basic safety. Despite my better judgment, I did do some tests of the laser engraving and cutting performance using the same test files I used on the D1. Surprising to me, the engraving was actually pretty reasonable. However, even at slower speeds and full power, for the most part the engraving was particularly shallow. By comparison, some of those were blasting right through on the previous 20-watt laser. Not a great surprise when it's 4 times more powerful. The cutting tests didn't make it all the way through the 6mm plywood, which is to be expected. This is a laser engraver, not a laser cutter. On other thinner materials or softer materials like foam, it will cut, but again, it will be a little bit slower than a laser diode that is 4 times the power. For veneer cutting for marquetry, the good news is a 5-watt laser will actually cut through the veneer just fine, even using the same settings that I used on the D1 Pro. That means in future videos when I explore laser marquetry properly, 5, 10, 15 or 20-watt lasers are essentially interchangeable for this purpose. From here I stopped testing due to safety concerns. Even with the cost savings, I think the corners cut don't make this good value. You can't easily add in those safety features, nor a crosshair. Adding a webcam could work, but the wide angle options that work with Lightburn and other software aren't particularly cheap, so you're erasing any of those savings. If Sculpfun were to address the safety concerns, much of what I've deemed bad could be weighed up in importance to reevaluate the value, but until then I'd recommend saving up a little bit more money and looking elsewhere. Thanks for watching, and Rach, come pick up your laser. I don't need 2 of these things.